Alright, this is part 3 for our alien. In this lecture we're going to be unwrapping the finger and toenails. What we're going to do is we're going to start by just doing a really crude unwrap on these things. And then once it's unwrapped, we're going to make a decision whether to continue improving it or not. I'm just going to give you a couple of tips on what you could do. I'm probably going to go with a really crude version, but I'll just point out a couple of different directions you could go with that, okay? So, I don't think this is going to be quite as hard as the eyeballs were, so that's kind of a relief. But there's more of them, so it's going to take a little bit longer. Alright, so let's start by, I'm going to select at least one vertex from each fingernail, and then we're going to hide everything but the fingernails and toenails. So go ahead and select linked. I'm just going to zoom out and double check. Yep, that's what I want. Go ahead and hide everything else. So let me fly in closer and look at the back sides of these nails. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is remove these faces that we'll never see. So using the face selection tool, I'm just going to go and select all these faces like this and delete them. I'm going to fly around and do the same thing on the other fingernails. And then we're going to have to repeat this process for the toenails. So I'm just going to go and do these edits real quick. And when I'm all done, we'll continue. Okay, so that's all the toes, and now we have all the back sides of everything pretty much eliminated. Let's zoom in to any one finger, doesn't matter which one. And we're going to figure out a formula first for one of these, and then we're going to repeat the same thing on all the remaining pieces. I think what I'm going to do is just unwrap it, because I envision this just unwrapping being a little bit blurry, but for the most part I'm going to put probably like an ivory type of texture on this, which doesn't really have a lot of detail, so I don't care if there's much blurring on this. Now if you plan on putting more detail in your finger and toenails, then you may want to use a technique that is not going to be quite so blurry, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So let's go ahead and go to the UV editing window and unwrap just this one nail for now. So it looks like it unwrapped nicely, but of course we haven't seen it with the stretching yet. So as you can see, there is some stretching on this object. Let's go ahead and take a look at this with the pattern on it. And I mean, it is pretty wobbly. It's what I would call a dirty, unwrapped fingernail. But anyway, if you could live with this, you could paint on this, you would be good to go. What you could do is maybe make a relief cut underneath. So this is the area you're probably not going to see so much. So maybe mark a seam down here like this. And we'll go ahead and unwrap that again. So there is some stretching, but it's happening up in this area right here, which is not quite as noticeable as the rest of this. So I think if I wanted to spend the time, I could probably iron this out eventually. Maybe a little T-joint over here, I'm thinking. And I'm only going to do a couple of these, and then I'm going to just basically say, okay, that's good enough. I'm happy with this. You may feel a little bit differently, but that's what I consider minimal stretching. You could do a better job than this. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you could go about doing this. But for now, I'm just going to remember that I basically made a seam underneath with like a little T section on top. And I'm going to end up doing all of them the same, unless I find a better or quicker way to do it right now. And this is attempt number 2. So my thoughts are, if I separated this into 2 hemispheres and stacked the 2 hemispheres on top of each other, then I would only have to paint on half of this, and the other half would look exactly the same. And in theory, it should be less stretching than this object right here. So let's go ahead and try that technique on this one. And again, I'm going to select linked, and let's go back to the UV editing window. That was quick. And unwrap this. So the 2 hemispheres look okay at a glance. Let's see what they look like with some texture on them. It's not bad. It's actually pretty stable. It was actually easier to use this technique than the other one because I didn't have to select that cross section. So I might actually go this route. However, I'm not done yet. Remember, I have to stack these on top of each other. So I'll go to Vertex, put my Vertex snapping tool on with a magnet, using my island selection, grab this and try to snap it over there. And you can see, obviously, they don't snap together very well. So let's try something else. So technically, these don't have to snap together perfectly. Not really. They just need to be generally in the same area, because most likely I'm going to be putting some like ivory or bone-like texture on this, which doesn't really have a lot of detail, and I could probably get away with just painting over it and leaving a nice, painting over the edges and doing a fairly good job, but not getting perfectly, edge to edge. So I can probably get away with doing something along these lines right here. Just get it kind of close and leave it like that. So this technique is fast, but then I have to go and manipulate it, move it, rotate it, kind of line it up and stuff like that. If you wanted it to be spot on perfect, you could probably take the time and line up all these vertices with the vertex snapping. I personally wouldn't do that. I think that that's way overkill for something as simple as this. I would be happy to just save something like this as a UV. Just make sure I paint way outside the lines and put on a texture that is not going to be a problem along the seams, Let's try a different technique on this one right here. And again, let's go back to the default window, even though it'll probably be very quick. But what if we unfolded this like a cardboard box? So that'll be the next test. So if we treated this as the front face, then we'd most likely want to put a seam here, 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 and here, just like that. And this would be a seam as well. I don't really need to mark that back seam, but since we've done it on all of the other videos, I'm going to do it again right now. So mark seam, and let's select all of that. And as I said, this would probably be real quick. We're already back to the UV editing window, and I'm going to unwrap that. So this is what that looks like. The problem with this, of course, is that we have seams now that we're going to be painting over. So you see this right here. Actually, here's another problem. Let me unwrap this again. Let's put this on angle based to a limit so that all of these are the same size. And I just don't like this technique that much, so I'm probably not going to use it because I have to paint over these seams. So what I'm going to do is clear all of those seams. And let's try something a little different this time. How about if we mark the seam this way? So we'd have half the hemisphere on top and the other half on the bottom. That way, my logic here is that you're looking at this mostly top down, and maybe even if we put the seam closer to the bottom, that might even be better. Something like this. We could probably get away with a seam like this even. So this would be its own island, and this would be another island. So there's another option right there. Or maybe something like this, or it's kind of like a baseball loop that we kind of worked on in the past. So something like that might work. Let's see what this looks like. It's a little bit different, but there's a little bit of stretching in here. But for the most part, it looks okay. And again, from this vantage point, it looks, for the most part, most of this checkerboard pattern looks really good, very easy to paint over. But then you have this problem over here where you have to paint over this seam. And so what I'm going to do, I could keep going, but what I'm going to do, I think the technique that I like the most is this one here, the one that I said I was probably going to stick with. So I think we can get away with a little bit of stretching around the tip of these points here. But I'm going to go with this little T seam and do the same thing on all of these just to make everything consistent. Okay? So we're going to clear the seams on this. We're going to clear the seams on that. And just go and repeat that same pattern on all of these nails. So they all have, I'm not doing a loop selection because that selects too much. So it's basically right up to here and then this little T right there on the bottoms of all these pieces. Okay, as you can see, I got all the fingernails and toenails now marked with that T-shaped pattern. And let's go ahead and unwrap them all. So I'm going to select them all at the same time, go back to my UV editing window, and unwrap them. You end up with something like this. What I'm going to do is just kind of put them together, but I'm not going to pay that much attention to how they look. They're just all going to be kind of crudely put together. I'm going to paint a basic texture over them that should look fine no matter how it lays out. So the first step to doing that is to make sure they're all going in the same direction. So right now, the one that's selected is going to be the direction that I want all the other ones to go. So anything that's going in the opposite direction, I'm going to select it and basically flip it around. Instead of doing it all right here, looks like that's a lot of stuff. So I'm going to just bring it out here and then rotate it 180 degrees. Now it's all going in the right direction. I'm going to snap everything into one position. Doesn't matter where, really. I can put it in the center, but I'm just going to throw it off to the side here and snap everything into that position. And it doesn't matter. I know it seems like you should get everything just perfect, but when you're putting a very general texture on things like this, you don't have to be perfect, because really you could paint a big rectangular shape around all this, and as long as it's all the same, it should unwrap just fine. It should texturize just fine. Okay, so everything is now in that one spot, and now I'm just going to select all of it and grab it, put it in the center, maybe scale it up if you want to make it higher resolution or something like that, or scale it down if you want to lower the resolution. So what I'm going to do is take a look at this close up. So I'm going to pick any one of these and just kind of zoom in on it and see what it looks like with a checkerboard pattern on there. Probably the resolution that I want is going to be around that size right there. So I'm just going to grab this whole thing and put it over here for now. And I kind of want to demonstrate what I mean by putting a generic texture on this. And what I'm gonna do is bring this into Photoshop real quick. I'm gonna have to undo all this later, but just to demonstrate what I mean by that, I'm gonna go and create like a bone-like pattern on this. It's not gonna be perfect, but it'll be enough to demonstrate what I'm talking about. I'm gonna do this in the center, and then we'll probably get rid of that texture and stuff later. So I'm gonna bring it up and scale a little bit too, so that we can really focus on the graphics a little bit more. So let's go ahead and export this UV layout. I'm going to name it, well, let's call it Alien UV Test, because that's really what it is. Export UV layout. And I'm going to open up Photoshop. Let's go ahead and drag that file into Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is rename this layer to UV, as you've seen me do in the past. Create a new layer. I'm going to call the new layer Color, and move that under the UV. That's a very important step. Let me zoom in a little bit, and basically, like I was saying before, I could paint way outside the lines if I want to, and that's what I'm going to do just to kind of demonstrate this. Let's make this a almost white, so not quite white. So I have to fill that in, add some noise. Let's go to our filter gallery, and I want to do something to this to make it a little more like bone. I don't know exactly which filter I want yet. This one ain't bad. It looks pretty cool. Something like that maybe. And then I'm going to hide the UV. So there we go. Something just like that. And go ahead and save this as the Alien. Instead of UV test, this is going to be a color or diffuse test. And I'll save it as a ping. Go back to Blender. So let's go ahead and open up that image file. Let me go to object mode here. You can see that that's what it looks like. I'm going to zoom in on just one of these so that we can see some of the texture detail of this, okay? So something like this. That's what I had in mind. That's what I mean by generalized or generic texture. I've been talking about this throughout the course. This is what I mean when I say that. So you can't really see any problems near the seam. Unless you get really close, you can kind of see the edge. But when you're far away, there's no way you would be able to tell that there's any problem at all there. That's what I mean. If you wanted there to be more detail, then you would just want to be careful around the seams. Okay, so I don't actually want to use that texture for anything. So what I'm going to do is unlink that for now. Or I could just choose the untitled, which is the checkerboard pattern. Notice you can still see it over here. That's because you need to go into edit mode, select all of those things, and then choose the untitled. That'll put it back to the checkerboard pattern. If you want to go back to the test, then you got to go over here and do that. Now remember, when you move this UV around, if I move this UV around, if I grab this and move it over here or something, see what happens to the fingernails? So that's the reason why I say once you set the UV down, you want to leave it down. We're almost done with this course. I really want to make that very clear. Notice that because it's a big rectangle, I still have a little bit of freedom. I could move this anywhere inside this rectangle and it would be fine. So that's one of the advantages of drawing way outside of the edges and using this technique. Okay, we're just about out of time, so let me go back to the default window, unhide everything else, zoom in on this guy, and I think we're going to do the inside of the mouth and the inside of the eye sockets in the next lecture. And then probably if there's enough time, we might be able to unwrap the rest of him all at once too. If not, we'll tackle all that in 2 different lectures. So try to be a step ahead, and I'll meet you in the next lecture. I'll see you then.